for these Jewish people. So here comes Jesus. And when he goes to sit down to eat, he doesn't do it. So instantly, these Pharisees get upset. This guy claims to be the king of the... And yet he's not following our traditions. He's not following our customs. Here, he comes in, he wants to eat with us, and he's not even washing his hands. There was nothing in the law of Moses that required it. It was Pharisees. And they had elevated this washing of hands. They had elevated it to the point to where it was just as good as Scripture. In their eyes and in their opinion. And knowing their thoughts, look what Jesus said to them in verses 39 through 41. He says, "But the Lord said to him, 'Now you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and evil. Fools! Didn't he who made the outside make the inside too? But I give from what is within to the poor, and then everything is clean for you.'" See, Jesus differs from his host here. And keep in mind, we said that these folks had memorized the entire Old Testament. They knew that Jesus said in 1 Samuel 16:7, "But the Lord said to Samuel, 'Do not look at his appearance or his stature, because I have rejected him.' Man does not see what the Lord sees, for man sees what is visible, but the Lord sees the heart." You see, this is what really always gets under my skin a little bit. Whenever you talk to somebody about coming to church, there's always two comments that I hear repeatedly, over and over and over again. And it always kind of gets under my skin a little bit. The very first thing that people want to say is, "I don't want to go to church, it's full of hypocrites." All it is a bunch of people who show up on Sunday morning, act like they're religious, and then the rest of the week they go and live however they want. They cuss, they drink, they smoke. They do all of these things. It's just a game. How many times, and I'm not going to ask, but I'm sure most of you have heard that people don't want to come to church because of the hypocrites. Is there hypocrites in church? I'm sure there is. But the second thing that I hear is, how do I dress? How do people in your church dress? See, that is a Pharisee mindset. If you're worried about the way people walk through that door, more about the clothes that they wear, if that's what you're worried about and not the condition of your heart, you are the very first one that needs to be at this altar repenting. I tell people, you wear what you got. Well, I was talking to somebody a long time ago, and they were talking about when people come to church, you are supposed to dress your best. And I'm not going to argue that. I'm not going to dispute that with anybody. But here's my question. How do you know that what that person came through those doors wearing is not the best that they got? Folks, Jesus is telling these Pharisees in no uncertain terms, you are more concerned with the way people look than you are with them knowing Jesus Christ. And that's not a place where any of us should want to be. We've all heard the stories about when people come to church. I don't care if you come in here covered head to toe in tattoos. That stuff does not, I'm telling you what, there's not one tattoo that will keep you out of heaven. But not professing a faith in Christ will keep you out of heaven. That's it. That's it. We shouldn't be worried about the way people come looking through that door. Our job is to get these people to Christ as quickly as we can. Josh McDowell, he said, "Christianity is not a religion." And I really like this. "Religion is humans trying to work God through good works. Christianity is God coming to men and women through Jesus Christ." Praise God for that. I went to a nursing home several years ago, and I was told that this woman, she wasn't religious, she wasn't a Christian, but they didn't think she had very long, and they wanted me to go out and try to talk to her. And she was a difficult person. And I'm going to tell you, whenever I pull in to talk to anybody that I don't know, the first thing I do is pray. Lord, give me the words, give me the wisdom. You already know how this is going to go. You know what this person needs to hear. I don't. Give me the words, give me the wisdom. And as soon as I walked into that room, I had a little Bible with me. And the very first thing she said to me was, "You're one of those religious people." And I just kind of smiled and I said, "Actually, no, I'm not very religious at all. At least I hope I'm not." And I sat down and we started to talk, and I asked her about where she went to church, and she'd never really went to church much. I asked her about her relationship with God, and she thought that she was okay. She wasn't sure. And, you just kind of get that feeling that it's not going to happen today. If you've ever led somebody to Christ, you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes I'm right here, it's going to happen, and then other times it's not going to be today. And as I talked to her and we started, this conversation, I told her, I said, I'm going to take off. I said, but if you ever want to be introduced to Christ, let me know. Because I can promise you, He wants to know you. But you've got to make that decision. And I got up and I started to walk out. And as soon as I got to the door, she said, "Joe," she said, "I think I want to meet him." And I'm telling you, I get the goosebumps even talking about it. And so I went back to where she was sitting, and I knelt down beside her, and we talked, and we prayed. And I'm going to tell you, both of us was crying. And I got up finally to leave, and before I even got back to my car, the person that wanted me to go out there and talk to her called me and said, "You're not going to believe it. She just called me and told me what happened." I said, "Yeah, I'm going to believe it because I was there." But, it's exciting. People think that just because we sit in church that we're religious. And folks, we should never be that way. And I want to look at some of these marks here. Look at in verse 42. He says, "Woe to you, Pharisees! You give 1/10 of mint, rue, and every kind of herb, and you bypass justice and love for God. These things you should have done without neglecting others." One of the big problems with the Pharisees is they would major on the minors. They would make a big deal out of things that really shouldn't matter. The Pharisees tithed. And is tithing important? Sure, it's important. But the Pharisees had made this sharing of God's blessing, and they had turned it into this ridiculous game of what they would do is they would go down into the garden and they would count every single herb to make sure that they were giving exactly 10%, because they didn't want to give any more. They weren't going to give 11%, and they didn't want to give 9%. So they had turned their tithing into something that was really a very religious thing for them. They would go down and they would count every little seed, every little herb, everything, and they would give exactly 0.1%. They were great tithers, but God is saying, look, you can be a great tither and still be an inward failure. And I'm going to tell you how that happens. When you look at tithing as, I have to tithe 10%, you've already messed it up. When you turn tithing into something I have to do, you've already missed it. Folks, we should want to tithe because of what God has blessed us with. We give out of the abundance of what God has given us. That's the importance of tithing. It's not because we have to do it. It's because we want to do it. Because the reality is simple. We wouldn't have what we have if it wasn't for God. It's really that simple. Well, I get up and I go to work every morning. This is all mine. Yeah, but you're forgetting. God has given you the ability to get up and go to work every morning. That's why we tithe. It's not something that is religious. It's not something that, we do because we have to. It's not a tradition or a custom. The act of tithing is a very act of worshiping God with what we have. That's why we do it. I'm going to tell you another reason not to do it. Don't tithe. I'm going to tell you, don't tithe. Don't do it. If you think that by me tithing, I'm going to get more of a blessing from God. God said He's more concerned with the heart when you do it. Don't look at tithing as a way to get more from God. And that's what the Pharisees were doing. They looked at this as we tithe because we have to, and we're going to give exactly 10%. This is our religious and this is our religious traditions and customs, and this is why we're tithing. If that's why you're doing it, don't. Because I'm going to tell you, God is not going to bless that. He tells us that, to tithe, to do all of these things. But if we're doing it because it's just something that we've always done and our heart's not really into it, or we're doing it because it's something that we feel we have to, we here at church, we take an offering each and every week. And be careful that it doesn't become just a mindless routine that we go through. Because what is happening is it's far more powerful than that. It's us worshiping and honoring God for what He has given us. See, we give out of the overflow of what God has graciously given us. You can't have a hard heart when you're doing it. You can't. It's in Malachi. I think it's in Malachi chapter 6. He warns the priest, don't rob from God. And by withholding that tithe, that's exactly what we're doing. But if we're doing it with the wrong mindset, we're not going to get that blessing from God. And we can't look at it as something that we have to do. Here's another thing. I know that these Pharisees is a group of religious people that no longer exist, but we can become that way so easily. Another way that we do it, how many times have you heard somebody say this? What version of the Bible do you read? I've had people get mad at me because I don't use the King James Version. I don't have anything against the King James Version. I like the King James Version. Matter of fact, most of the Bible verses that I have in my head are King James. I can't say John 3:16 unless it's in the King James. I can't quote Psalm 23 unless it's in King James. But folks, we can get so religious about these things. I always tell people when it comes to translations, use a word for word. Don't get a paraphrased or summarized Bible. But we get hung up on the simplest of things. And that was the problem with the Pharisees. Another thing, here's a big one, especially that you'll hear today. We'll use this to judge people. Are you a Democrat or a Republican? You've been asked that question? Do you homeschool? Do you send your kids to Christian school? Or they go to public school? There's all kinds of questions that we use to judge people and make these judgments. Wherever the issues are, we use these to define whether a person is truly spiritual or not. And that's what the Pharisees did. Look at verse 43. He says, "Woe to you, Pharisees! You love the front seat in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces." The most important seats in the synagogue were the front seat. Unlike a Baptist church where they're the back. But you wanted to be in the front seat. Here's the thing. For you folks that serve in the church, why do you do what you do? Is it to be noticed by other people? Is it to get that pat on the back? Is it to bring notoriety to yourself? Why are you in church on Sunday morning? Is it so you can tell your buddies that this is where you were? The Pharisees wanted all the attention. They wasn't going to direct any of that towards God. They were doing what they were doing so that they could be noticed, so they could be in a position of what they believed to be power. Because the one thing, well, two things that the Pharisees loved more than anything else in this world was money and power. And they were going to do whatever they could to obtain those two things. Keep in mind, very religious, but very lost. They were more concerned with money and power than they were to leading people to Christ. They wanted to be noticed. They wanted you to know exactly who they were. So when they walked into the church, they would come directly to the front seat. And now here's the thing. I don't know if you know how the synagogues were set up. Like this front pew here would be turned the other way. The front seat would be turned the other way. Now that is probably why the Baptists always sat in the back. But the pew would be turned around, and the people that was in the front would be facing everybody else. So why do you think that they wanted to sit there? It wasn't because you was looking at the back of their head. It was so that you could see their face and know exactly who these religious elites were. They wanted you to know that they were there in church. They wanted you to know that this seat is reserved for me because I am I'm religious, I'm educated, I'm one of the elite people. They wanted you to know that. Folks, the last thing on our mind when we're serving in the church should be, how am I going to get the glory for this? Just like I said about tithing, it's a way of worshiping God. So is serving in the church. How many times do you hear people, get excited about it? Our heart, when it comes to serving God, should never be, do I got children's church again? Do I have to really do another children's message or children's church? Or do I really got to collect offering? Or do I really got to do this? Or do I really got to do that? Do you think that that's honoring God? Do you think He's going to bless your efforts when you're doing it? I'm telling you what, if you've never served God, you have no idea what you're missing. It is an honor to come into God's house and to serve Him. There's a joy in that. There's a blessing in that. But the same way with tithing. If you're doing it to be noticed or you're doing it to bring glory to yourself, then don't do it. Because God is not going to bless that. That's what the Pharisees did. They looked at serving in the church as their job. They wanted the glory and they wanted the honor, and they had the seats turned the other way so everybody would know exactly who they were. Folks, if that's our mindset in serving God, we missed it. We've missed the God of the Bible. And are our acts of service to Christ to be seen by Him? Or do we want them to be seen by men? Listen to what Jesus said in Matthew 6:5. He says, whenever you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, because they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by people. I assure you, they've got their reward. Folks, why are we doing what we're doing? Why do we tithe? Why do we serve in the church? Colossians 3:23 and 24 says, whatever you do, do it enthusiastically as something done for the Lord and not for men, knowing that you will receive the reward of an inheritance from the Lord. You serve the Lord Christ. But here's the thing. Don't take that verse and twist it. And what I mean by that is, don't twist it to mean that if I serve God, then He's going to bless me. If I tithe to God, He's going to bless me. It's because of the condition of your heart matters to Him most. These Pharisees were more concerned about being seen as these deeply religious people than they were about a relationship with God. You see, they did these things believing that they was God because of the things they were doing. Sometimes it's the things that we're not doing that gives us a better relationship with God. Maybe instead of serving God and thinking that this is how you're going to be blessed by God,